Hi everybody. So today we're going to talk about a piece of jewelry that I recently found listed online and won at auction for a great price. So the sellers did not recognize the piece, and it inspired me to talk a little bit more about it and share some history about why it's an important piece of jewelry, at least in my opinion. I also thought it might help you recognize this if you ever run across it or other designs from this collection or designer. So if you're a fan of Tiffany Company, of design in general, of architecture, etc., please stick around. I hope this video is informative and fun to watch, and maybe you'll learn something new. In 2006, Tiffany released a line of jewelry with world-renowned architect Frank Gehry. His pieces took inspiration from recurring design themes throughout his career in architecture. And I think it's probably important to mention that I am a former Tiffany & Company employee. I started working there in 2007, so the year after his collection was released. So I'm very familiar with his pieces because I handled and looked at them pretty much daily for years, which is why I knew exactly what this bangle was when I spotted it online. But I also went to art school where I majored in illustration, but studied design and Frank Gehry. He came up in some of my textbooks, and I actually pulled an old college textbook out, and I'm going to reference a paragraph from that book in just a minute. So I want to talk a little bit now about who Frank Gehry is, and essentially his importance and influence in the world of design. So I'm going to share images of some of his buildings on the screen here. And as you take a look at these, I want you to pay attention to the shapes and forms that he uses in his buildings. We have the Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. We have the Tower Office Building in Hanover, Germany. There's a fish sculpture here in Barcelona. So not only was he an architect, he also did sculpture as well as jewelry design, which we will talk about. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name of this building, but it's this beautiful, incredible, wavy, textured building in Dusseldorf, Germany. And then probably his most famous building is the Guggenheim Museum in Spain. There is a Guggenheim Museum in New York, which was designed famously by Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Gehry designed this version of the Guggenheim Museum that exists in Spain, and is currently designing a third Guggenheim Museum, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then finally, here is another building in Las Vegas, which, I mean, if you look at the shapes here, they're just so interesting. I think most people would consider him a modern or postmodernist designer. He certainly takes after Frank Lloyd Wright, which we just mentioned, in sort of the boldness in lines of his buildings. I think Gehry's work is very recognizable. He has very strong lines, and there's kind of a bit of whimsy and fantasy to his work, in my opinion. Like, if you look at the shapes of these buildings, it almost seems like the laws of physics have been suspended and that these buildings really shouldn't even be standing. But that tells you what an incredible architect he is and what a creative mind he has. So again, looking at the shapes in these buildings here, you're going to see those shapes on a much smaller scale in the designs that he created for Tiffany. So from an overall design perspective, Frank Gehry is an incredibly important American designer and architect, and he's actually still working today. So he's a living artist and he's 94 years old, and he is currently designing the third Guggenheim Museum that is set to open in 2025 in Abu Dhabi. I believe it's currently being built. So that's really incredible to think that he's 94 and is still designing these incredible, fabulous buildings. When his line of jewelry was released at Tiffany & Company, it was very popular with a certain type of collector, I would say, but not necessarily the average Tiffany customer, because his designs were honestly really different from everything else we were selling at that time. Just the lines of it was so bold compared to a lot of the other classic collections that were in the store at that time. And he also used some really interesting materials in his work. So I'm going to reference that college art book now, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I'm going to share an image of what I'm reading from here. So, quote, "The growing taste for modern industrial materials treated with expressive individuality, renewed interest and appreciation for American architect Frank Lloyd Wright's designs. Other related architectural designs featuring the aesthetic possibilities of reinforced concrete included Eros Saarinen's TW8 terminal at JFK Airport in New York. The sculptural possibilities of new materials and production technologies for building continue to provide the basis for originality in architecture. For instance, in Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum or his Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA. I wanted to read this passage to you because it references his use of reinforced concrete as a material in his buildings. And some of the more interesting and rare pieces from his Tiffany collection include concrete as a jewelry material. And Tiffany had certainly never used concrete in their jewelry prior to this, but it's so brilliantly tied to his career as an architect. They're just the most interesting of the pieces in my opinion. And those pieces were made in limited quantity and they are hard to find now. And honestly, I really wish I had had the foresight to purchase them back when I was an employee, but you know, hindsight is 20/20 as they say. So I don't personally own a concrete piece, but I would love to someday. What I'm sharing with you here today is the sterling silver version of his torque bangle, which he did also make in concrete in the wider version of this bangle bracelet as well as a ring. It was made in many different materials. He used many different stones, including jasper and agate and jade. So his use of materials was kind of wide-ranging and it was very interesting. I also have a narrow version of his torque ring in silver that I'm sharing with you here. And the third piece of Gehry that I have is this tube bangle, which is also in sterling silver. Both of these were purchased directly from Tiffany back when I was an employee. So his line of jewelry is no longer being sold through Tiffany, which of course makes them a bit more collectible at this point since they're not currently being made. And I feel like his work will only continue to become more valuable, especially considering his influence on the world of design as a whole and the fact that he is still a living artist. I think it's been true for many, many artists throughout history that their work becomes more appreciated or more valuable, collectible, to generations in the future who are looking back and appreciating their contribution to art or design.
They didn't tell me what to do. They let me go free pretty much. I had thought I was going to get more direction, but they gave none. And there were no restrictions. Everything goes, so to speak. And they made it all. And I don't know that all of it will be shown or sold, but there was a lot of experimentation and it led to things, and they were very good partners that way.
I do think his work is something to be looking out for. If you ever see his pieces out at a thrift store or online or something, hopefully you'll be able to recognize them after watching this video and kind of have an understanding for why they're important and sort of where their design comes from. So I hope that you learned a little something and I hope that this was interesting. I've been sharing a lot of vintage and antique jewelry recently on my channel, which is something that I'm currently learning about. I have some books and I've been watching a lot of content about it, trying to learn more, but it's not something that I've studied to the degree that I've studied Tiffany pieces and, you know, modern design. So I just definitely have a little more knowledge on this type of jewelry. So I was happy to share it with you. I don't see a lot of videos talking about more modern Tiffany pieces specifically, or Frank Gehry's jewelry collection. So I do hope this was interesting and it brought light to a designer who's not known for jewelry, but his pieces are quite beautiful and certainly worth knowing about.